by different names. Back in Jesus' day, you had the Pharisees and you had the Sadducees. And whenever I say that name, I always think of the kids' song, right? They're so sad, you see. You guys remember that? Okay, never mind. Anyway, the two worldviews that we're talking about here are rationalism and legalism. The Pharisees were legalists. They really believed that you earned your way by obeying their rules. It wasn't that they had to obey them, it's just that other people had to. We still see that today. You are a good person, and as long as your good stuff outweighs your bad stuff, then God's obligated to take you into heaven, right? You're a legalist. The Sadducees were really... the Sadducees were rationalists. They were people who didn't believe in the supernatural. They only believed in the first 5 books of Moses. That's actually the reason they didn't believe in the resurrection or in angels or anything supernatural. They were kind of the show-me people. If you could prove it to me, then I will believe it. And today we have rationalism gone wild in our culture and in our world. People think if you can't see it in a test tube, then it simply doesn't exist. If it's something that you can't observe with your eyes and understand with your mind, then it certainly can't be real. Now, both of these viewpoints have some major problems with them, and Jesus really confronts both in Matthew chapter 22. Now, most of Jesus' 3-year ministry, he spent avoiding this kind of confrontation. Jesus came for one reason and one reason only, and that was to die for the sins of the world. But Jesus, being the Son of God, being God Himself, He had this incredible compassion and love. And so everywhere He went, He encountered people who were brutalized, who were victimized, who were broken, who were sick, and who were held captive. And He couldn't help but reach out to those people because He and He alone had the power to actually affect a positive difference in their lives. And so He touched people and they became healed. He spoke to demons and they ran away as quick as they could, and lives were put back together. And you notice it's kind of funny, I think. After Jesus would do something like raise somebody from the dead, He'd say, now, be sure not to tell anybody about this, as if. But He really was there for His purpose. And so He was marching very steadfastly, one step in front of the other, on a journey to Jerusalem to die. And now He's here. He's arrived in Jerusalem. And over the last few weeks, we've talked about what Jesus, as Matthew portrays Him as the King, is doing, returning to His kingdom, His palace. What did He do when He came into the temple? He cleaned it out. He said, this is supposed to be a way for people to come to me. But instead, you're using it as a way to feed your flesh and your greed. And so He tossed all the people out. And then, just like removing a dam, the people who needed that healing and that touch from God just came pouring into the temple, and Jesus healed them and touched them, and all kinds of wonderful things were happening. Well, the problem with all this is that there were people in charge of this kingdom, of this nation, of the temple. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the religious leaders of the day. And believe you me, they were not going to let go of that leadership position very easily at all. And so Jesus kind of takes the role of the apprentice. And he basically comes in and tells these religious leaders, you're fired. And He's giving them notice. He's giving them a pink slip and the explanation as to why what they had made of Judaism had completely polluted and taken away from what it was really supposed to be. And Jesus is going to set it right again. Now, I remember when I was a kid, we used to go down to visit or go stay at my parents' cabin at a lake in Northern California. And the lake was a couple miles wide, and so a lot of times we'd head out in the boat, and you were trying to get from point A to point B, right? Now, if you've ever been on a boat in the water and you're trying to navigate, if you just say, it's over yonder somewhere, okay, and you just take off and you think, I'll just hold the wheel steady and I'll be okay. And what happens is you will naturally begin to drift one way or another. And it only takes like a 1 degree shift in your course over the period of miles scooting through the water, and you'll end up at a completely different place than you wanted to be. So it is as well with the Jews, and especially the Jewish leaders. They started out going the right direction, and that is to relationship with God, pointing the world to the Lord through the sacrifices that He instituted as a picture of the sacrifice of the Lamb of God, of the Messiah, who was to come. But as they went forward, they trusted in themselves to know the direction more than they trusted in God. And so instead of using the compass, instead of picking out the landmark of the Messiah and His character to aim towards, they just figured, oh, we can handle this ourselves. And as time went on, they began to veer off just a little bit and a little bit more and a little bit more. And while it was happening, they didn't necessarily think, oh, I'm walking away from God. But as time went on, they've got further and further away from Him. They began to move into legalism, to say, if a little bit of rules and regulations are good, then a whole lot of rules and regulations are even better. And that'll keep us in line toward God, so we can be like God. But really what it was doing is moving them away. Because what the system that God had created was supposed to make people realize how lost they were, how inadequate they were, how unable they were in order to actually approach God. That they had to have the sacrifices in order to do that. To see that animal die in front of them, to realize my sins are being laid upon this animal. So they got off course. And by the time Jesus arrived, they were way off course. They had missed the mark by a mile. So Jesus is coming to tell them a course correction. Now the question will be, are they willing to accept His instruction? Now we're going to see here this morning, Jesus has given the Pharisees and the religious leaders a couple of parables to show them how miserable they were in keeping what God's purpose for Israel was. And now in chapter 22, He's got one more parable that He's going to give them that is even more generally associated with how you get into God's kingdom. And then they're going to really try and trip Jesus up. They begin to finally, it gets through their thick skulls, that this guy is a threat, and so we need to derail him. We need to get him out of the way. And there are kind of 4 things that get spoken about here. And those 4 things are this: how to love God and live on the earth. How to live on the earth while looking to heaven,